On Monday, she takes a walk with Johnny. On Tuesday, she has a talk with Jim. On Wednesday, she likes to dance with Tommy.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of My Index to Sex. I'm Lynn Ferguson, a big vanilla Scottish woman living in the San Fernando Valley, which is periodically very hot, but rarely in a sexy way. And I'm joined by my pal, Sephe Haven, at one point America's #1 escort. In each episode, Sephe delves into the index box of all of her past clients, and I ask her all the questions everyone wants answered. I'm lying. That's what I should be doing. What I'll actually be doing is assigning the anonymous client on the card a name and clumsily trying to understand a world which is completely foreign to me. Anyway, glad you could join us.
On Thursday, she takes a chance with Tim.
I have to tell you, Sephe, I'm slightly worried about this episode. I'll tell you why. Because I've had one of those weeks where everything I touch breaks, right? So I'm like, oh, this could be dangerous, but hopefully it'll be fine. But we'll still be friends no matter what at the end of this episode, right? We make that agreement.
We will always be friends, whether you're broken or not broken. Actually, it was funny because I pulled a card.
You did?
And it has to do with things breaking.
No.
I know, really. I have several in front of me, but you just said that, so I'm looking down and, yeah. And so should I just tell you about that one?
Yeah. So what's the initial? Who is it?
I'm not going to tell you the exact. I'm going to make up. Okay, so it's like he has a name that's double, like Will Williamson or Mike Michelson. You know, like that kind of thing.
Oh yeah, George
Jorgensen. Yes.
Or Bill. Actually, I can't do George because my sister used to work beside a guy who really was called George. And he was a lovely guy, as I guess you would have to be if your name was George in a stereo manner. But it did make me wonder about his parents. I mean, who does that?
I was thinking, what is that? I know a girl who has like a name that, oh God, now what is her name? But it's like her first name is the same as her last name, but with a little twist, you know? And I thought, why would they do that? So this guy is, yes,
Right, so it's a guy. Do you have an initial for me or you don't want to do that?
No, because the name is so similar and because of what I'm about to talk about, he will probably
all right.
know it was
him. What about Steven?
Very good.
Shall we call him Steven?
Even Steven.
Right. Tell me about Double Steve.
I met him when I was first working for Susan. So before I even had the cards. And when I first met him, I was probably in my early 20s and he was probably in his mid 30s. So it wasn't, such a number.
All right.
And when I started to work then for myself, he found me and that's how I got a card on him. But when I first met him working for Susan, he used to keep me for more than 1 hour. So that was a very good thing. I would get there and he was for 2 or 3 hours.
What did you do at those hours? Did you play like cards or was it all like, did you have just some time where you hung about and just talked about stuff and like complained about things? Did you talk about horoscopes or?
Oh, I did talk horoscopes. Yes, for sure. I had everybody's sign. Well, this person, what do we call Steve Stevenson? He's a Libra.
Oh,
so yes, so that's his thing.
Balanced. You see, that's the balance. 2 names are balanced. If I'm called Stephen, then my surname should be Stephen, and then everything's totally balanced. Stephen.
Yes. So what did we talk about? We talked about, well, when I worked for Susan, it was different than what I did when I worked for myself because we had the hour. So we had to learn how to do everything within that hour. And yet, if you wanted to have him keep you for a second hour, it was sort of like when you write a story and you're writing a series, and you don't want it to end completely or no one's going to buy the second book.
Yeah.
So we don't want the ending to come too soon.
Well, I see what you're saying.
You know what I'm saying? So
not too happy on the ending. Not a happy ending, a just mildly pleasing one.
Mildly pleasing and heading towards happiness.
There you go.
So that when Susan would call and saying, how was everything? Are you wanting to send her back? He would say, no, I'm going to keep her for another hour. So it was kind of a ploy. But it was a good ploy because everybody was happy. Except for maybe his wallet. But it was a good ploy because so I'd get there, and if I thought, okay, I have to make the most of the hour, and most men, if you're there for an hour in their mind, then they don't want you to waste the time, and you need a little time to go to the bathroom, freshen up, come back. Yeah. So we did a little bit of talking, but mostly those clients, they would end up wanting things to move along fairly fast, and the only way to slow them down. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, just no. I'm interested because if you're only there for an hour and it's business and, all that stuff, is there minute 40 where you're like, okay, that's when the happiness happens? Or is it minute 47? Do you count? Where you're like, no, it's only minute 27.
You're so good. Yeah, so picture this. Picture yourself.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I want to picture it.
No,
I don't know.
Picture yourself in a time situation. So the first thing I used to wear watches in those days, remember? And also that most men had digital clocks by their bed. Most people did. Yeah. There were those digital, alarm clocks. Yeah. So you would see the big red letters against the black background, And so Susan would always say, okay, darling, it's 11:21. I'll call you out at 12:21. And she was precise. Mm. And because she was precise, you knew that you had to time it to the minute to make it happen. So for instance, if you'd get started, you see how much leeway you had to talk a little bit, because that was always nice, and got not just to waste time, as a terrible gentleman would say, but to really get to know somebody a little bit, so it didn't feel so like, hey, you're here, Tom, and then you're going to leave. There was a little bit of warmth, but then usually they wanted to get moving. So right after the bathroom, I would say that they should be in bed, but laying on their stomach, so I could start them with a massage. And that made things a little more sensual. And if I could drag that out a little bit. So at a certain point on the clock, you knew that you had to finish the back or he would start to get antsy.
Yeah. How long?
Well, it depends on the guy and the clock and everything else, but anywhere between 10 to 15, 20 minutes. But then you could start doing sexy things like working your way around the body and maybe taking the underwear off, and maybe you stand up and take your stuff a little, just to kill time a little bit more before you turn him over to get to the meat of things, so to speak.
Meat and potatoes.
the meat and the two potatoes. So at a certain point, you turn him over, and instead of going straight for the meat and potatoes, you have dessert. You have like a little salad and some amuse-bouche. You go for the amuse-bouche. Oh.
I don't know if I like the word bush in that area. The amuse-bouche worries me in that area. Anyway, back to the meat and potatoes.
No, but that would be true then, wouldn't it? The amuse-bouche, bush.
Yeah.
The amuse-bouche. Because there could be some of the little oral stuff going on, which could drag things out. What she wanted to do was build the tension, like in a really good book, so high that by 5 minutes to the time that Susan was going to call, that you got to a place where he wasn't going to finish, but he thought he might soon.
Yeah.
And then the phone would ring, and he would say, oh, shit. And then he'd pick up the phone, and Susan would say, hello, Mr. Smith. How's everything going with Natasha, or whatever the name was? And he would say, good. And she'd say, are you keeping her? Are you sending her back to me? And he said, I'm going to keep her for another hour. And then you were on for another hour, which was like a triumph. But starting working with Susan, you learned about how to time out sessions to make it not only good for you in terms of dragging it to a certain place, but also to make it a really nice, sensual thing. And it actually was a lot lovelier than come in, come out, and bye-bye.
Yeah.
So, but how did we get off on that? So this person, Steve Stevenson, I met him that way. And when I first met him, he would keep me for several hours, but he loved to just talk, which was great. And he was interesting because he was a skydiver. And and that scared me. I'm afraid of heights anyway, but it scared me so much and then he would show me that in those days they had the VHS tapes. So he would take out all the VHS tapes and plug them into the thing, and we'd watch his skydiving.
Wow.
Of him jumping out of planes, which was actually really fascinating and took a lot of time. So that was fun too.
I ask you, did the skydiving affect? I mean, I haven't found myself ever thinking about this before, but then often we get into a conversation where I'm like, I've no idea how I've thought about that. Like, I've never thought about it. I wonder if you drop from great heights, right? Like, if you're dropping yourself, you know, like what I'm coming to is, you know, if you sunbathe too much and you get dry, withery skin, right? That's just part of the thing with sunbathing. I'm just wondering, if you drop yourself from great heights and you're doing weird stuff with gravity, does that do things to a person's areas? I mean, it's, you know, not, you know what I'm saying? Because it's like, it just seems like, you know, you've got the force of the coming down and I just wondered, I mean, of all people who would know that, like, did Double Steve have a different physical makeup from other gentlemen you may have visited
Well,
in that area?
no, he didn't, but I don't think he skydived naked. But also, I had a girlfriend who was a working escort. I love her madly. And she, this was years and years later when I was number one and she was number two or whatever it was. And she met a client who, instead of going to his house and watching videotapes of him skydiving, wanted to take her skydiving. And so when she told me this story, I said, well, you didn't go, because he was paying her as an escort to go skydiving. And she said, oh, yes, I went. And I was like, oh, my God, are you crazy?
Yeah.
I would never. Well, I said, would you do it again? And she said, well, you know, I don't know, because like when you get up there, the gravity force is so much that it really makes your face kind of pull back, and then it makes your mascara smear. So I don't think it's a good thing to do. You know? I mean, that's what she was worried about.
Here's my mascara.
Yeah, she was worried about that. I'm like thinking death and, you know,
Yeah.
broken parts. And she's like, well, my mascara was a little runny, you know. So yeah. No, his thing was not, he was a beautiful man and, you know, young and so forth, but the broken thing comes later.
Oh,
So
because he was skydiving. He was skydiving. He broke
you
things.
have to wait. You can't
I'm
flip ahead to the
sorry.
climax.
It's just because you gave such a good hint. I was like, oh, no, right, okay, I'm going to stop talking. Tell me what happened.
Years later, when I finally was on my own, he found me again. And I saw him once. And I asked him about the skydiving, of course, and we were glad to see each other. But I was a little older at this point, and I think he was still thinking of me when I was in my 20s. And although I felt like I looked better older, you know, some men just like young girls. And so I think he was sort of disappointed that I had grown up a little, that I'd aged a decade.
That you couldn't just stay the same age for Double Stephen.
I'm working on it, you know, plastic surgery. But when I first met him, he was this cheerful young guy, you know, who was showing me his videos and we had a great time. But now he was very kind of sober and, you know, and I said, do you not skydive anymore? And he said, no, I don't anymore. And I said, what happened? And it turned out he went on a skydiving thing and his best friend's chute didn't open and died.
Oh, dear.
I know. I can't even imagine living through that. But yeah, so thinking of things breaking, I guess it's good it's only your dishwasher, you know?
Well, yeah, that's the truth. How did you know my dishwasher had broken? Had I psychically?
Computer, refrigerator, all that stuff.
Everything breaking around me. No, that's quite sad, though. But what's interesting is that he changed but thought you shouldn't, or that was surprised that you did too.
You know, it happened to me a couple of times where as time went by, because then I got even older, you know, and older.
Well, you know, I have to say, considering the alternative, getting older is a good thing. Like, you either get older or you're the person whose parachute doesn't open on the way down, right? So I'm like, I'll take the getting older. I'm good with that. I'll take the wrinkles.
But you can't be an escort and get older. Or I thought, but that's actually not true. But that was the sentiment, you know, and that's what Stephen used to sort of
Double
Steve sort of made me feel, for sure.
Yeah.
You can't get older. I did for a long time have a client that I just adored, and I thought to myself, if I wasn't an escort and we met in real life, that maybe we should get married, that maybe we should date. And of course, he was married, but at one point getting a divorce, and then they didn't. But, so I had this secret desire. And I used to see him 3 times a week.
Wow.
For many, many years. And we had some shorter sessions, some longer sessions, but I felt like we were perfect together in my mind. And then 9/11 happened, years went by, and I moved. And, anyways, I ended up having to go back into the business, and he found me, and I was so happy to see him. And I thought, oh my God, what if he's divorced now? What if there's room for us, And I saw him, and he looked great, except he was much older, of course.
Yeah.
But to me, he was still just the sexy guy that I knew. And then you could feel it in him that he was doing his best to have a great time with me. And I kept thinking, what is the issue? What's the invisible wall?
Yeah.
And it was that I was older, and he was kind of dancing around it a little bit. He's, well, time has gone by, hasn't it? Or, boy, this has changed about you. Or, and I thought,
I think it's them that because sometimes when people want to go back, it's because they like that version of themselves when they were younger. Or is it that he just was a guy who liked young girls?
No, I think you're right. The first time, I think there was something about our connection the first time. And in my eyes, I hope the reflection of him was the same, that I was looking at him with just as googly eyes as I always did. But probably he was looking at me going, yeah, this isn't the same. It's, years have gone by. And first of all, I wasn't in my apartment anymore, which is where he always came. Instead, I was staying in hotels because I was just back in the business.
Yeah.
Also, at that point, I wasn't as healthy as I am now.
Yeah.
I don't really drink anymore, but I think I was drinking pretty heavily then. And so that probably showed in my skin, and maybe I was 5 pounds more than I am now and things like that. So maybe that was that too.
So with Steven, with Stereo Steve, did you see him again after that? Or was that it? It was just once and then?
Yeah, then he stopped, then I didn't see him. And then it was many, many years later, like almost, I would say a decade later, I was in LA, and he found me in LA, and he said, are you still working? And I said, well, I'm back to working. I was away from working, but I'm back. And I came over, and he opened like a bottle of wine, in which he poured me a glass, which I couldn't have because I was driving. So he had it, and he had a gorgeous dog, which I had just met. And I thought, oh, this would be nice to come see him and everything. And he sort of, I could tell he was sort of surprised that I aged again, and I was like, well, but at that point I thought I looked better than I did the middle time that I saw him. And he told me that he hadn't skydived since. And he sort of, I was going to stay as long as he wanted me to without charging him different. But he wanted to kind of get it over with and then kind of move on to the rest of whatever his day was going to be. And that was unusual because it never was like that with him. And I think he just wanted to get it over with because he felt like he had to do that. And he really didn't want to be with me. So it felt icky. And I was like, I don't want to, that when you show up at somebody's door and they don't know you, the first thing they do is judge you. So one of the problems with escorting, or the hardest parts, was that first moment of judgment, of does she look like her pictures? Is she pretty enough? Do I want her, because they're paying. And so they're going to judge you. So that's always uncomfortable. And I didn't have that for a very long time. So then I saw Steve again. And I was double Steve, here it is again, that horrible judgment feeling,
The thing with Stereo Steve, did he ever have relationships outside you? Because a lot of times people that you've seen, they've got relationships, but maybe their wife is sick or they're like, whatever. What about Stereo Steve? Did he do that?
I love that he's double Steve and Stereo Steve and double Steve. Yeah. As far as I know, he dated people, but he never got married. And the last time that I saw him, he must have been in his late 50s. So, and still not married. So I don't know. Maybe there was a sense of not wanting women to be that human. I don't know,
Maybe, or it definitely suggests a thing about reality and fantasy. It's a difficult line, isn't it? The thing that you're doing, because what you're doing is you're sort of selling a fantasy, but within a world that's reality. And I wonder about it now, things I never thought about before, I now think about because of our conversations.
Oh, really?
Like there's that whole, yeah, totally. Like this thing where there's like, there's the online porn, but there's also like the anime porn, like there's cartoony porn things. So there's like young gentlemen or young people, I would say, who are experiencing arousal, which is a weird word for somebody like me to say, through a cartoon character and may never have that with a person. Do you know what I mean? And then I think that's quite weird. But in essence, what you're talking about, though, is you're talking about certain individuals who appeared to have relationships in real terms, connecting in real terms, but in essence, you are a character rather than a human. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does make a lot of sense. Your character in a play, it depends on the person. There were definitely people that I saw either through Susan's or through my own who really had a hard time connecting, not because anything was wrong with them. They just had a hard time connecting with women and what to expect of themselves. And they really needed escorts. Some of them got over that after seeing escorts because they were reflected as being really wonderful men. And then there were some men that just had things that they were never going to get over. Like we had talked at some point about the Superman guy who had to wear the Superman, but he had to, he had to. That was his thing. And he was never going to be able to date in real life unless he met like Supergirl.
He go to Comic Con or something like that in his suit and meet somebody when he was wearing his suit and be like, "Hi, I'm a guy. I'm part-time Clark Kent." And they'd meet someone and go, "You look great in your Superman suit." And they'd go, "Well, that's handy because I can never without my Superman suit." And then, so he was maybe just going the wrong places. A Comic Con might have sorted that guy out.
You're right. I don't know why they don't advertise that.
We have done a service today, Sephe. There may be people listening to this going, "Oh, I can only really feel excitement when I'm dressed up as," and then now they'll know to go to Comic Con. Did you ever want to be somebody other than you? When you were little, did you ever want to be?
I still want to be somebody other than me. Always, every minute of the day. Did you?
I just want to be somebody whose shit isn't broken. Like I want to be somebody whose dishwasher works and can dependently go to a dishwasher and it works. I want to be somebody who's organized. When I was younger, when I was a little kid, I had that thing about wanting to be a nurse and, want to be a teacher, all that stuff, the little things you want to do when you're really young. And all really valid jobs. And then you go through a point in time where you're like, you want to be a really good actress. And now that I'm at this age, I just want to be somebody who's got my shit together. Do you know what I mean? I want to be somebody who lies down at the end of the night, right? Just before I go to sleep and I go, "Oh, I got all my shit done today and I never broke anything. Everything still working." That would be the character that I would play. That would be me.
I think you can find your partner at Comic-Con on that,
Maybe.
Some organized.
Yeah.
That's what they do.
Hey, one last question though, right? Because we're talking about the broken thing, right? Have you ever been in the situation where it's the other way around, right? So you're talking about people who looked at you and they were like, "Oh yeah, you got old." Have you ever been in a situation where you turned up to somebody and then you go, "Oh shit, life has been hard"? Has that ever happened?
It only happened one time. I mean, I know if I'm showing up 10 years later, they're going to look older, obviously. Hopefully. Otherwise, that's weird. Or then I want to know their secret. What did you do?
Well, otherwise you're going to find a big bulldog clip of skin at the back of their neck that's holding their face in place.
I know. No, there was one time it wasn't even at work. I wasn't working. It was an ex-client got in touch with me and said, "Oh my God, you're in my neighborhood. Can we meet for coffee or something?" And I thought, well, I wouldn't normally do that, but a quick coffee, sure. So I get there and I'm waiting and I'm waiting and I'm waiting. This guy comes up to me and he says, "Sasha?" And I'm like, "Yes, oh my God." And he's like, I don't want to say his name. I'm going to say Mike. "It's Mike." And I didn't remember him at all. Like, not only did he look different, I'm like, is that the same? In my mind, in my memory, he looked one way to me. And this did not look like him at all. When I started talking, it was him. But when I went home, I had to go through my files and go, what did he look like? Why was I thinking that he... And I think he probably lost weight, and I think he got older, and I guess he got shorter. Like, to me, he was always so tall, but maybe I got tall. Maybe I got tall with age. I don't know.
We all shorter in the end, especially, you know what? I bet you that's what happens to Stereo Steve. Because doesn't this well, maybe not, because he stopped doing the sky jumping thing, you know. But doesn't that make you shorter? If you're going to jump at the skydiving, doesn't that make you a bit shorter?
I guess if you land, you know, and you keep crunching.
Right?
I don't know.
Yeah. And all the time you got all that, like the gravity. I mean, I know gravity is like a constant thing, but you've also got the gravity in the foot. Oh, you'd have to know about physics for that. I don't know about physics. Anyway, you know, it's probably a good thing in the end, even though he was miserable, because he was able to stay at home and have his dog and judge people. And you know what? I think, Sephe, that he probably had the judginess in him from the very beginning, because that's the kind of stuff that happens when you give somebody a stereo name. Like, right? Because he must have gone through his life when he go, what's your name? Stephen. No, what's your first name? Stephen. What's your surname? Stephen. So you're saying you're Stephen. I am saying that's not your real name, right? Like, he must, every interaction that he gets, people must be like annoying to him. And that is why in the end, he lived on his own with a dog who never asked his name. That's what I think.
That's either that or he's a Libra, and they're very lovely. They love beauty. Libras love beauty. Yeah. If I presented him with non-beauty in his mind.
You're still beautiful. No, I just think...
We'll just go with Stephen was the problem.
Stephen was the problem. That's the name of this episode. Stephen was the problem. Because if he'd been called Bill Stephen or Stephen Bill or something like that, I bet you'd be much happier. People who are pregnant at the moment and about to name something, be responsible. Give them 2 different names in order that if they don't like one of them, they've always got the other one. Because not everybody's a Libra, and because people in shops can be assholes when they're asking for your name. I think that's what we've learned this week.
I think that's it. I think you've hit it.
She's the sweetheart of 6 other guys.
Well, that's all from us for this episode. I've been Lynn Ferguson, talking to Sephe Haven. Join us again next time for another episode of My Index to Sex.
That bozo of mine, 'cause she's the sweetheart of 6 other guys.
You have been listening to My Index to Sex, produced by Ferdal LLC. The music was performed by Chesney Hawkes, and you can learn more about Sephe Haven at sephehaven.com. Go to mitspodcast.com to check out the show notes for more details, including how to stay in touch, give feedback, and ask questions. All the best.
Sunday's my only time with that bozo of mine, 'cause she's the sweetheart of 6 other guys.